gosh.
Mika, a lot to talk about over the weekend. Why don't we start, though, in Mexico?
Yeah, the agreement that the United States and Mexico reached on migration that averts the implementation of President Trump's threatened tariffs on Mexican goods. President Trump took to Twitter on Friday night to announce the deal, under which Mexico will deploy 6,000 National Guard troops throughout the country, mainly to its southern border with Guatemala. It also expands a program called Migrant Protection Protocols, which allows U.S. immigration enforcement officials to send Central American migrants to Mexico as their asylum claims are pending. Mexico also says it will offer those migrants jobs, health care, and education. The agreement does not include a major Trump administration demand that Mexico agree to a, quote, safe third country designation, which would have required the country to permanently accept most asylum seekers from Central America.
Mika, this obviously, the president pushed this as really great news this past weekend. But, of course, controversy arose immediately because many people in Mexico, in the United States, and also many reporters are saying this deal was nothing new. So there's been a back and forth all weekend over whether this deal was new or not.
Well, Trump called it a, quote, new deal, but that's up for debate. The New York Times reports that Mexico had previously agreed to deploy its National Guard during high-level secret talks back in March, according to officials from both countries who are familiar with the negotiations. A senior administration official told NBC News that some key elements of the deal had been agreed to months ago, but added the two sides had agreed to expand on some of the previous commitments. The official noted that Mexico's commitment to deploy up to 6,000 troops was modestly larger, up from about 5,400. And NPR reports that full operations are not expected to be up and running until 2021. In addition, the Migrant Protection Protocols program, the arrangement that allows asylum seekers to remain in Mexico while their cases proceed in the U.S., was reached and announced back in December by then Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen. A federal judge blocked the implementation of that program in April, but an appeals court said it could move forward while the legal challenge proceeds. So, after averting a crisis that he set into motion with a sudden threat to impose tariffs, President Trump is now defending a deal with Mexico that critics say will do little to curb the migrant crisis. Arrests at the border have been soaring in recent months to levels that are twice of what they were under President Obama, putting President Trump under pressure to address the issue. As New Yorker staff writer Jonathan Blitzer tweeted, the president's constant threats of sweeping action at the border, closing it, ending asylum, imposing tariffs, cutting aid, play right into the sales pitch of smugglers in region. Go to the U.S. now before it's too late. Meanwhile, Mexicans' favorable view of the United States has been cut in half during the Trump presidency, according to Pew Research.
Richard Oz, a very good point made by the New Yorker that, and this is something that we've seen from the very beginning, Barack Obama, over the course of the Obama presidency, had taken extraordinarily high illegal border crossing numbers, and using both carrot and stick, got those numbers down to 50-year lows. President Trump has come in, and because of the threats, because of the sky is falling rhetoric, in large part because also, as has been said here, playing into the smuggler's hands, he's actually created part of that crisis. And of course, the other part of the crisis is caused by the fact that he's cutting actually relief to those Central American countries that need it the most, that would keep people in their Central American countries instead of fleeing, seeking asylum.
Yeah, I think that last point, Joe, is really what's most critical here. Immigration policy can't start at the border, and anytime it does, you're playing defense and you're playing catch-up. So the administration doesn't really have an integrated policy that would include helping the Central American countries deal with their challenge. This new agreement may not be all that new, to say the least. implementation is a lot in life, and the idea that it's going to take years for the Mexicans to get their new National Guard up to speed is a critical thing. And one last thing, and Steve can comment on this, the fact that this was done using authorities, emergency authorities that were never meant to be used for this purpose, at a time the administration had just introduced or started the process of getting the new U.S. Mexico-Canada trade agreement approved by the U.S. Congress. So it's so inconsistent, because what this does is undermine any confidence on the part of business as well as Mexico and Canada that we're willing to essentially honor the trade agreement before the president goes back to tariffs. So I don't think this gained a lot on immigration, but it certainly complicated our relations with Mexico and Canada, and certainly made life a lot more difficult for American businesses and American workers.
Well, you know, Steve, people may not realize just how important of a trading partner Mexico is with the United States. It's extraordinarily important to our economic well-being, and it's also, despite the fact that the president and other people constantly downgrade the importance of Mexico, the fact is their GDP is just about the size of Russia's. So what is the impact of having a president of the United States with a 5% approval rating that plays right into the hands of those who would not wish the United States well just south of the border?
Yeah, Mexico is a huge trading partner, and also what people don't fully appreciate is that it's not as if we simply buy some stuff from Mexico and sell some stuff from Mexico. Because of NAFTA over the last 20 years, we've created a completely integrated supply chain between us and Mexico. And so, for example, the automobile industry, one of the sources of our many of our imports from Mexico, you'll see parts going back and forth across the Mexican border multiple times in the course of assembly, as companies optimize their supply chains and do some things in the U.S., some things back in Mexico. And so for us to get into some kind of an economic war with Mexico is terrible for Mexico economically, but it's also terrible for us. And you've seen this in the reaction of the business community to what the president's been doing.
Well, you know, President Trump's been promising relief for American farmers who obviously are getting hammered every day because of the president's trade war with China. And on Saturday, he tweeted that Mexico would be coming to the rescue, writing in all caps, Mexico's agreed to immediately begin buying large quantities of agricultural products from our great patriot farmers. But three Mexican officials told Bloomberg Saturday they weren't aware of any side deals. John Meacham, this is again, I wrote in the Washington Post last week the importance of separating the signal and the ground noise. These tweets, these false claims, all ground noise, all intended to make the president look tough to his base, to Mexico, and yet so many of these claims are nothing more than Donald Trump falsehoods.
Yeah, I continue to think that we may look back on the Trump presidency as the presidency of Admiral Boom. Remember the guy who lived next door to Mary Poppins, who had the ship on top of the house, and he thought he was still in the Navy, and so he'd fire the cannon off at cocktail hour, and everybody sort of humored him. Oh, it's Admiral Boom again. That's kind of where we are, right? I mean, we've sort of child-proofed the presidency in terms of the USS McCain. You know, we give him all this room, but Richard would know more about this than I would. I continue to think that foreign leaders must look at this presidency in the way we used to look at particularly unstable regimes. And you just have to pick and choose, and you figure out who's going to be here for the long term, who's not going to be here as you negotiate and try to deal with this. And why would any foreign power take him at face value?
Yeah, there was an interesting piece in the New York Times about it where they quoted the president's book, that he likes to keep people off balance by being unpredictable. And there's only two problems with it. One is our allies, by definition, they count on our predictability and reliability. That comes with being an ally. And adversaries, I think you're right. Increasingly now, they're basically saying they can challenge us. They don't have to take it that seriously. So rather than deterring, the danger of this kind of unreliability is that actually it will encourage challenges against this country.
Yeah.
Well, and the inconsistency, Caddy, is impossible for our allies to keep up with. Of course, the president spent the first couple of years attacking our democratic allies across Western Europe. This past week, he was actually quite gracious to France and other Western European allies. And then he turned his rhetorical fire south of the border to Mexico.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Looking at the Mexican press this weekend, they have a very different reading of the way that this whole negotiation over tariffs went down. Their headlines are screaming things like Mexico wins, Mexico has deactivated Trump. They're definitely seeing this as something that they got the better of the Trump administration over. That problem of unpredictability is serious, though, whether it's from an ally's point of view in terms of foreign relations, whether it's a business, whether you are trying to plan building a car or making a car or introducing a new product, but you don't know whether you're going to suddenly have 5% tariffs, 10% tariffs, up to 25% tariffs, because even though these ones have been rescinded, we've now seen that he's capable of saying that it's going to happen again. And I think that's what's really throwing other countries off. And when I was in Europe during the course of all last week, part of the feeling is that, okay, we've got used to this guy, we just have to get through the next 2 years. But the real concern in terms of building long-term relationships and multilateral organization is what happens if there's another 4 years of Donald Trump, because that is quantifiably different, is what I'm hearing from European diplomats and leaders, just in terms of the structures that we have in place around the world, but also the relationship that they have to have with the U.S.
Yeah, you know, it's so important, though, again, to try to figure out, Mika, what is the president doing for domestic audiences, for his base, and what is the actual impact of these tweets, of these policies, of these attacks. And it's interesting that the very people he's trying to reach out to are the very people who are going to be hurt by a tariff war with China, a tariff war with Mexico, a tariff war with these other countries. And so, again, it's short-sighted. The president wants the big headline. He wants the all-caps tweet. But at the end of the day, it's working-class Americans, middle-class Americans, and farmers who will feel the pinch of these policies.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.